We all know that Europe is one of the most developed, populated and economically successful continents, but does have surprisingly few skyscrapers when compared to Asia and North America. Welcome to Top Exclusive, and today I present you the secret behind why Europe doesn't build skyscrapers. Make sure to stay until the end of the video because you'll get your answers. But before that, click the subscribe button and ring the bell. Let's talk about numbers. There are 155 skyscrapers in Hong Kong alone, while there are just 218 in Europe, with 65% of them are located in 5 big cities: Frankfurt, Paris, Moscow, London and Istanbul. Okay, but why are there so few skyscrapers? Why haven't other cities even planned on rising one? Can you expect this to be changed in our fast developing world? Let's find out. Let's jump back to 1929 when Europe's first skyscraper began to take its ground, more accurately in the Belgian city Antwerp. While in the new era, skyscrapers tend to be counted as if they're more than 150 meters tall. Back then, this building was just 87 meters and still remains the second tallest structure of any kind in the city. Also, it took 3 years to be completed. Yeah, it's a lot of time compared to world's tallest buildings of the future video, which you don't want to miss out. But it's understandable since the technology grew rapidly in modern history. However, the skyscraper was still taller than the world's first one. Do you know which one it is? The Home Insurance Building was the world's first skyscraper located in Chicago back in 1885. With 10 stories and at 55 meters height, this skyscraper set the standards for such constructions. Now, since we know more about the history of skyscrapers, let's move on. So, when these buildings were built, many European cities were already established with grand historic buildings and public spaces that left little room for new large structures. Also, all of them were evenly zoned, plus not facing the high demand for floor space in key districts where usually has a high drive for rising development. Meanwhile, the power of North America was growing, a cultural rivalry emerging between Americans and Europeans, resulting in each continent taking concepts of each other. Although Europe tends to preserve its heritage, North America aims to become the model for a new age. And no, that by any means doesn't explain what's holding back the continent ever since. The birth of the Second World War. Many thought European cities would try to replicate and even surpass the insane skyscrapers that were rising all over North America. But it ended with the question, why didn't Europe modernize? Instead of that, Western Europe lost landmarks and historical structures, which was the result of the desire to restore what had been destroyed, eventually holding back the other part. Furthermore, the lower the population of Europe at the time of course meant the demand for floor in the area that mostly drives skyscraper construction. But it just wasn't there, resulting in modern structures replacing historical buildings which could not be restored. But what was happening on the other side of the continent? In particular, Eastern Europe, the rebuild effort of the Soviet Union consisted largely of repetitive structures that tend to rehouse much of the population. That was the time that the continent finally saw its first skyscraper rise, just in response to indicate their power and influence. Another fact, Brussels may never build a skyscraper, but it's partly responsible for the lack of them across the continent. Let's jump further to the 1960s, where many buildings in the city were destroyed to open room for large modern structures that didn't have a cultural value, to be honest. Leading architects called the term Brusselization, planning to introduce new rules. And it was that numerous cities adopted similar regulations and set aside controlled districts to keep high-rise development away from historical centers. Starting of the 21st century, a lot has changed. And it wasn't bad by any means. Europe did minor changes, especially in the architectural trends, resulting in the world getting increasingly globalized. As we mentioned earlier, the 5 cities rise as the demand for commercial space in the centers has increased drastically. Meanwhile, smaller cities across Europe, which got affected by modest growth, had now turned their intentions to improve the living standards for their citizens. Yeah, maybe not in tall buildings, but Europe has ranked consistently among the highest in the world for both happiness and sustainability, while still maintaining importance within their national economies. However, skyscrapers in today's cities are no longer driven by economic growth or need for commercial office space. Recently, Key research proves that 60% of global human population is said to be living in urban areas in less than 10 years. The importance of skyscrapers is now rising rapidly, particularly across other continents like Asia and North America. But why is that? Many people migrating into cities and major urban areas drives the less significant demand for residential space, which probably ends up being a high-rise structure. However, Europe isn't immune even the least, particularly in such a heavy globalized world with the continent's desire. The continent expects to see rapid growth in skyscrapers ahead in the decades. So, what's the secret behind why Europe doesn't build skyscrapers? Well, with the desire to retain as much culture and architecture as possible, it has all to do with the past. What could we add up to this video? We would like to hear in the comments. That covers up the secret behind why Europe doesn't build skyscrapers. Make sure to subscribe and like the video.